Let me know when you're ready. You ready?
Yes.
All right, my name is J. Vernon Cromartie. I'm a professor of sociology at Contra Costa College and chair of the sociology department. I want to welcome you all to the paper session titled Race and Ethnicity Issues and Concerns. Today we will have three presenters. The first presenter will be Luciano Cruz, and Luciano will tell you more about his paper. The second presenter will be George Morris, and Professor Morris will tell you more about his paper. And I, J. Vernon Cromartie, will be the third presenter, and I'll tell you more about my paper. So without further ado, we're going to start the session, and it's going to be Luciano Cruz, Professor Cruz.
Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Happy to be here. So my name is Luciano Cruz. I am sociology instructor at Moreno Valley College. So this for-profit is actually my dissertation. Hopefully, I will finish by May. I haven't get all the data, so just now I'm analyzing. So this is my dissertation. And why this topic in the forum about race? Because most of the students going to for-profits are usually blacks, Latinos, right? So a large number of blacks and Latino and ethnic minorities like this word, for a lack of a better word, that goes to for-profits. Also women and veterans. So that's why this topic. So the topic, the purpose of my dissertation is to analyze from a student's own perspective, right, the experience at for-profit, right? So what factors compel vulnerable populations to enroll in expensive profit-seeking institutions? And how the impact of credentialism and lack of cultural capitalism, capital shapes the enrollment of low socioeconomic status students in for-profit institutions. So that's the purpose of this study. My research question: how do lack of cultural capital and the demand for academic credential dictate the educational opportunities here in the United States and the enrollment of vulnerable populations at for-profit institutions? So how these two, that's also my framework, right? Credentialism, the economy has changed. Now to be able to find a job, get a job, and that pays a little bit more than minimum wage in a credential, right? So, and students, especially older students, returning students go to for-profit. People who is working and go to take classes during the nights, people who already has a family, right? So that is usually the target. Veterans, people coming back after serving the Army or the Marines for 6, 5, 7 years, go and get your education. So because there's this push toward credential to be able to get a job and maintain yourself employable, and also because of the lack of cultural capital, students are not analyzing the quality of the education they are receiving the institution. What usually students see when they go to the institution? It's going to be faster, and I will find a job quick. Now, some of the certificates are 8 months, 9 months, 18 months. So what usually, I'm getting this I got this from the interviews. Faster, and I will be able to get a job. Significance of the problem. For a while, people didn't take a lot of attention to for-profit schools, right? But then later on, they start to look a little more careful because why? For-profit institutions charge tuition and fees that is higher than the counterpart. Not 3-4 times higher than community college, and sometimes higher than also private school, but not for profit, right? So the tuitions are more expensive, Students who attend for-profit school have a higher probability of ending up unemployed and with high student loans. Default on student loans vastly exceed those of others in higher education. So the default on for-profit, students take the loans and later on not be able to pay and default. And we know what's happening when people default the student loan. They credit goes to trash, right? So this graphic showing here, 30% of students in higher education in this country are in the for-profit institutions, schools. And 47% the students taking, the for-profit is responsible for 47% of all the money that goes from the government towards student loan. 47% of all students taking student loans are students for-profit. And there's also, loan defaults, 47% loan defaults, loan default. And also a large number also asking for loan cancellation. Because happens in California, we had ITT Tech closed down, we had Coleman University closed down, we had, and the students was kind of asking the Secretary of the State to forgive the loans. Because they took the loan, the school closed down, they didn't finish their education, now they have the loan to pay back. For-profit institutions consider institutions like University of Phoenix, right? Everett College, Concord Career College, DeVry, and so on. This is all part of the for-profits. They are very diverse. They offer certificates, they offer associate's degrees, they offer bachelor's degrees, they offer masters and PhDs. You will find that majority are students doing associate degrees, but they offer, or certificates or associate degree, but they offer everything. University of Phoenix offer all type of degrees. They offer also masters and PhDs. So in my research, I use same structured face-to-face interviews with open-ended questions. My sample is 25 students from for-profit in Southern California. So I interviewed students from University of Phoenix, Everest, Agassiz, Westwood, so usually here in Southern California. Participants will be student working in the certificate or associate degrees, or also alumni. And have these two categories: student that is going to the school now, and a student that has been to for-profit. Most of my participants was usually through Snowball, but also I walked to the institution and introduced my research, introduced myself, and student was very interested. They came and they want to participate. I just walked in to University of Phoenix, went to Everett College, and said, "No, I'm Luciano here now. I'm not a crazy person to buy the use, so this is my research." And they was very voluntary, and then they to participate. And some of the students I interviewed were my students at the community college, the students that went to for-profit and now are at the community college. So when I announced my research, they want to participate. I don't offer any extra credit or anything, so okay, it's voluntarily, they came to participate. I will go quick here because of the time. For-profit has been around for a while. It's not something new, has been there for a long time. But what we see, they will increase the number of students around the 1990s and 2000. But for-profit has been there for since 1850s, right? 1890 we had a for-profit institution, but was a very big push about the for-profits around the 1986 to 2008. They say the for-profit sector grew at average annual rate of 8.4%. Why? Recession. That 2008 research also, a large student went to for-profit. And also something changed that also helped to for-profit to grow was they qualified the GI Bill. Under the GI Bill, for-profit school became eligible to enroll students who receive federal financial aid. So in the Reauthorization of Higher Education Act 1972 allowed tuition subsidies such as Pell Grants to be used for students to pay the tuition at for-profit. So those two federal laws help to for-profit institutions because now 80% of the money going to for-profits come from student loan. 80%. Who are the students for-profit, right? For-profit students are predominantly low socioeconomic status, right? African American, Latino, women, older, non-traditional students, as I said, coming back to school, and veterans, right? So African American account for 13% of all students in higher education, but they are 22% in for-profit. Hispanic students are 15%. In for-profit, while they are 11.5% of overall institutions, and women are 65% enrolled in for-profit, so large numbers of women. For-profit students are composed of large number of single parents, students of lower income family, and twice as many those students they have only a GED. Twice as many as students who goes to community college, students at for-profit, they have usually a GED. At the business model, you get what I want to put out here, the sector's main form of revenue is federal financial aid in the form of loans. That's the main revenue. Some of the findings. Positive aspect, like everything in life, there's a balance. Flexible schedule, right? Like I said, since the student is older, not traditional, with family and holding job during the day, so they have flexible schedules, classes during the night, online classes, right? So that's one the reason many students go to for-profits. Easy and simple enrollment, right? Is basically if you can pay, you are in. Not too many secrets. Classes usually 1 day a week. They have a totally different system from traditional schools. Classes are usually 1 day a week for 5 days a week. University of Phoenix especially, you take one class, students take one class per period, 5 weeks, 1 day of week. When they finish that class, then they start another class. Same thing, 1 day a week for 5 weeks.
National University.
Huh?
National University also.
It's the same. Masters, student in master PhD usually are 6 weeks. Also, same system, 1 day of week. Fast degree, like I said. Now, the time to complete a certificate or degree at for-profit is faster than in traditional schools. Accessibility, close to student home, it's very accessible. Parking lot, so it's very easy, for accessibility is very easy. A little more about the positives. Student described to building job networking, because mostly are adults, so people build a network to get a better job. Small class size, so they said the interaction between students and instructors are kind of one-on-one. Students described to class to be between 7 to 12 students per class, right? Sometimes classes only now, it's a 1 day a week, open enrollment. If you can pay, you are in. Getting close to the end. Some of not so positive aspect, right? Students enroll to for-profit school because they want to finish faster, but they don't necessarily analyze the quality and the cost of the programs. I got this in most of the interviews. The majority of the students interviewed don't recommend for-profit for someone else. One of the questions that, do you recommend for-profit? Majority don't recommend for-profit. Many students complain about the low quality of the instruction. Like what I got also in interviews. I learned more doing the work than at the school. The school didn't teach me something that I was supposed to know when I got to the job. I was a student who was going to pharmacy, and he said that they learn about 70% doing the work, right? Majority of the students state that the for-profit schools are too expensive, and tuition cost and quality of instruction don't match. They usually say, I'm paid too much for something that don't have such a high quality. That's what got from the interview. And getting close to the end, major funding. Credits are difficult to transfer to other institutions. Sometimes they don't transfer. So if a student now, someone 18, 19 years old, now today you think about doing business, but tomorrow you find out that I want to be a sociology professor. You have to start from the zero. Don't transfer. So that's one of the major impacts, that people don't transfer credits because the system is different. But what caught most of my attention are the cost. Students leave for-profit school with very high student loans. Average, $20,000 to $40,000, but there are also situations where people are getting $65,000 to $80,000 in student loans. I interviewed a lady, was an African-American lady at University of Phoenix. She is in $85,000 student loan. She did bachelor's and master's at University of Phoenix. After something that is also coming out, and this is going to the end, in the research, after accumulating high loans, many students then enroll at a community college. They go to a for-profit, accumulate that loan, they have to pay the loan back. And something I found out in the research, there's no forgiveness for student loan. Even if people file for bankruptcy, you have to pay. They change the rules of the game. There's no forgiveness. You have to pay back your student loan. So after they accumulate that loan, they go back to community college. Last one. Many students at for-profit institutions do not learn the essential aspect of their chosen career. And they sometimes struggle in the workplace due to the lack of proper training. I had one student interview a couple weeks ago, and she was doing vocational nursing, and she said she struggled when she got the job because there was things that people was working, they look at her and said, you don't know that. How come you don't know that? That was the student described on the interview. Conclusion, my research showed that lack of cultural capital and the demand for credential is, without any doubt, one of the major forces push students to for-profit. One of the questions in my research is that, do you know the difference between for-profit and non-for-profit? Most students, they don't know, right? Difference. And one of the differences is that even though all institutions receive money, for-profit institution, the money that they get sometimes distributed between shareholders and CEOs. And later, part of that money goes back to the institution. And usually a regular institution, significant amount of the revenue goes back to the institution in form of programs, scholarship, all this kind of stuff. Low socioeconomic studies student of color, single parent, old student, veteran students, in their quest to fund employment and to maintain themselves employable, enroll in high expensive, low quality institution for profit. They live out with big loans to pay back and a questionable degrees. Last one, for-profit sector makes high level of profit, taking advantage of vulnerable student population. Thank you.
All right, our next presenter will be George Morris. George Morris, an adjunct professor of economics at Country Costa College. And I'd like to point out that our panel is very diverse. We all belong to the black race, but we all have some ethnic diversity. Luciano is a native of Brazil. George is a native of Trinidad. And I am a native of Georgia who is a black man of Geechee and Gullah heritage. So without further ado, we're going to have Professor Morris, and he will give you, let me give you sit down, please. He will give you his title. All right.
Okay. Good morning, morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Wish there were more people here, but we do what we have,
I
right?
think they got lost in the hallway.
So again?
I think they got lost in the hallway.
And then we're going to hold the questions to the end.
Yeah. Okay, my area of contribution to this particular topic, or is the contribution of the diaspora Africans, Africans that live in the diaspora. And particularly we talk about Africans throughout the Western Hemisphere, including the Caribbean, including Central America, South America, and even here in the States, right? We know, for instance, that, okay, let me first go do this. This is,
This is bad.
that's,
This is for right here.
oh, this one. Okay, so the purpose of this paper, the contribution, the potential contribution of the diaspora Africans to African unity, growth, economic development, with special reference to possibilities and barriers. It will also address other issues related to African development and Pan-Africanism. In this paper, the diasporic Africans refers to people of black African descent who have roots in the Americas or other parts of the world. The scope of this study is to demonstrate the link between the diaspora African development. It also shows obstacles facing both and the difficulties they encounter with respect to education and jobs. These obstacles seriously impact their participation with respect to Africa's rapid development. This study will be limited to the efforts of Africans on the continent and some parts of the diaspora. African Americans, of course, Afro-Brazilians and Afro-Colombians. The reason why I choose that, for example, the largest African population that's English-speaking came in the U.S. In terms of slaves in Brazil was actually Latin America the largest. And Colombia actually is the second largest African population. In fact, Brazil is the second largest population in fact, in the world.
In the world.
Oh.
Outside Africa.
Outside Africa. Nigeria, I think, is the first, and then, of course, Brazil. All right? Methodology, of course, primary data collected, secondary data collected, other researchers, scholarly articles and research papers, scholarly books. Africa's struggle against European colonial powers stretched as far back as 1415 when the Portuguese first came to Africa. When they first came, by the way, they didn't come for slaves, they came for gold. And that was the main thrust, for gold. Somehow, along the line, of course, slavery pops its head up and it becomes a more important thing. And then, of course, that's all they wanted. They even stopped looking at gold. Now, at that given time, we have to look and see that, remember we're talking about kingdoms. So their main thing at that period of time was to look to bring back gold, you know, for the kingdom, whether it's England, whether it's France, whatever, but that was the main thing. But somehow, the Portuguese landed this concept and slaves started, right? So what you do find, though, you find, even though sometimes kept very quiet, there's always been a resistance to what has been done to African people, always. We have never stopped, even from the very time they caught us and put us in slavery. When we were actually in Africa, we was in the slave dungeon. And the resistance to get us in that particular area, a lot of people died and suffered within those dungeons. Because we have never stopped resisting, okay? So even in the colonial in the colonial rule, for example, many Africans, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, we were fighting for Africa even though we lived here. We were still fighting for Africa. We fought, but there's a lot of heroes, for example, people like George Padmore, people like W. Du Bois. All these guys born outside of Africa, but their contribution was very clear. They knew that they had to restore that. In fact, if you look at the names of what African people call themselves during that period of time, it was always Africans. They never called themselves African American, they never called themselves none of those things. Because they figured that this was temporary, and then they would be on the way back, all right? Now, in the last couple of decades, probably less, the African countries have been moving rapidly in terms of economic development. They are trying to break away and get to a point where they at least come to a form of independence. And they have to go back to the same old goals, the goals of Pan-Africanism, which came out of the Western Hemisphere, not out of Africa. Right? But today, Africa is at a crossroads. They are at a point where they have to be very, very careful because you have new players that's playing the field, brand new players, that didn't have necessarily had the historical legacy of the European powers, but we have to look at all of it. There you go. So by 2001, you had the dismantling of the African Unity, or OAU, and then at the same time, you had the construction of the African Union. The African Union had some, I would say, beautiful goals. One of the goals they have is by 2063, they want Africa to unite. I mean, not just only in terms of verbal or politics, they want them to unite in terms of access to back and forth between countries. They want to break down all the so-called borders. All these things push Africa to start developing rapidly. And so one of the first things they had to do, or wanted to do, is to kind of make sure they have links. Not just roads, but also trains, airport, all the contacts, so that by 2063, you should be able to drive from Cairo all the way down to Johannesburg. That's the kind of establishment they want to have, okay? Again, I mentioned before, we talk about W. Du Bois and we talk about George Padmore, for instance. All these, the agenda that the African Union had established is based upon those fights and the struggles that took place before. So they had at least a vision that was established way back in the 1900s by a man called Henry Sylvester Williams, who was also born in Trinidad. And we find that that concept, as early as that started, the fight has never stopped. Sylvester Williams died very early, and so W. Du Bois took over, and all the congresses after that, Du Bois carried it on. In fact, most of Du Bois' life, most of his activities, was not the so-called, what's the organization? NAACP, no. It was actually Pan-Africanism. His entire life was fought that way, right? And so, the concept that we're looking at now, which is the African Union, had its roots way back then, okay? The Pan-African vision. All right, here we go. Now, what we also find out as they begin to move very rapidly towards development, or they're trying to get there as fast as they could, you need capital. Of course, labor is there, but we need capital. And we need capital in terms of infrastructure development. Because to link roads and highways, by the way, they started, I think even from Kenya, from Nairobi, I think to, what's the, on the coast? Nairobi all the way out to the Indian Ocean, the train is already established. And so people can travel, it should normally take, I think, maybe a day, 2 days or whatever. Now I think it's 4 hours and you get there, okay? Good development. But in order to get to that goal of 2063, it takes $95 billion each year for that to happen. It's a lot of money, okay? Which the Africans at this time don't have. What they do have is resources. Okay, let's see. Now, look at the economic growth, for instance. Is this nice? Okay, look at the Ivory Coast. Okay, these figures, of course, have changed, right? And you find that 8.5% growth rate took place. Tanzania, 6.9%. Senegal, 6.6%. Djibouti, 6.5%. Rwanda, 6.3%. Kenya, 6%. Mozambique, 6, Central African Republic, and so on and so forth. What's amazing though, even Rwanda, for example, they came out of that genocide. Their GDP was in the negative. It was way down. And they were able to build that back up. It's a remarkable story, which is often not told. And so they're leading in terms of that whole Eastern Africa integration. Because what Africa is trying to do is to integrate by section. The North integrate, and the East would integrate. The South, the Central, and the West. And of course, one of the things that's often not told, the Africans in the Western Hemisphere is part of the 6th district in terms of trying to help Africa develop. All right? Okay, what we need is education. Education is a major thing in terms of what we call human capital, right? Human capital is what is a major factor in development. So we find that we look at the U.S. for instance, all right? Non-white, we look at make comparison. We try and look at black, for example, native black, foreign-born blacks. We can still see that, given the goals and the objective of Africa, the Africans outside cannot make the kind of contribution they would like to make, because the oppression from slavery until now, they still doesn't have. I mean, after so many years of building the Western world, they don't have enough capital to kind of help Africa develop as fast. And so education is a major factor and what we call human capital, right? And we can still see Africans in the United States is not on the high par as we would like them to be. We look, for example, at certain percentages in terms of the type of degrees: biology, chemistry, math, stat, engineering, physics, earth science. Again, the percentages are pretty small compared to what we would like it to be, much larger, all right? We look, for example, now at Brazil. Again, we expect a contribution to come from all over, including Africa, but also from Africans in the West. And we find that, again, the Africans, in terms of this particular portion right here, we still see that the Africans are not there. In fact, the education standard in Brazil is very, very poor. It has a history that started back during the so-called Jesuit education, way back then, right? We look now to, for example, within the race. Again, I have to move very fast. Within each race, you find different sections of primaries, incomplete primary graduation, secondary, and so on and so forth. You still find African rank extremely low, okay? Now, we look at Colombia, for example. Again, the second largest African population inside the Western Hemisphere. Inside Latin America, sorry. And again, we find, 10 million people, right, in Colombia. 78.4